Okay. So welcome everyone. We'll get this thing started now that we're recording. Oh. So welcome to our first ever Librarians Discuss event hosted by Special Collections for our exhibits. Today, I am excited to present to you two librarians who worked on the Special Collections exhibit. Yay! Our in-person audience of one. This is so fun. Anyway, this is Ann Davis, for those of you who don't know her, and Allee Monheim. And I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves here in a little bit. I'm Kat Lewis. I'm emceeing today, and I'll be asking some questions. After I finish this introduction section, I'm going to pass the mic over to Allie and Ann. So you will see the questions that I'm asking up here on this screen, but they will also kind of repeat the question back as they start to answer, and we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to leave this here. For you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and about your position at the library, how you got into this.
Do you want to go first? You can go. Okay, I'll go first. So the question is, what's our position at UW Libraries and how did we get into the field? So I am the public service librarian for special collections. So I run our research room, do a lot of outreach, and occasionally curate exhibits. I have been working in libraries and archives for almost 18 years now. And I just kind of fell into it in like community college. I wanted an on-site or on-campus job and just kind of never stopped. So I came specifically to UW for this job. I was really excited about this because I had 3 part-time jobs and it's combined all my favorite parts of all of them. So working with students, working with researchers, and working with archival and rare materials.
I'm Ann Davis, and I kind of have 2 jobs. I'm the collection development coordinator for Odegaard Library, which is our undergraduate library, and then also the anthropology and museology librarian. And I've been working here. I started as a student in 2000, so I've been at the UW Libraries for a minute. And how I fell into it, I was actually working as a teacher, an English teacher, and I was subbing and not particularly enjoying it. And then there was one day when I subbed in a library at a high school, and it was all my favorite parts of like working with students, but not having to come up with lesson plans. And I was like, this is me. This is what I enjoy. So yeah, I've been working in libraries pretty much ever since.
You guys start reading graphic novels, and what do that?
Am I going first again? Okay. So the question is, when did you first start reading graphic novels and what drew you to them? So I always really enjoyed comics. I actually used to read like the physical newspaper comics, and I loved web comics, especially as like a teen. Um, and I started reading graphic novels really in college. There was kind of a big push of graphic novels being made into movies. So like Sin City, V for Vendetta, Watchmen. And so I started out being kind of interested in that. And then I just kind of really loved like the art and the storytelling and kind of how those two mediums really worked together. And just kind of stuck with it.
Cool. Uh, I've always read comics and as a kid, and I've always liked them. And I'm just a really visual person. I really I learn better when things are visual. And I I started reading like probably 2003 2003, maybe when I first, soon after I started here, partly because it was sort of a niche that I saw wasn't being filled. There wasn't a lot of graphic novels here at the time, and so I saw it as a need, and so I started reading them more and doing some research on them in the early 2000s.
So what was the first time you worked with graphic novels professionally?
You go first.
Okay. So the first time I worked with them professionally was probably in 2005. Like I said, I felt like it was a need that we didn't have a lot of here. And so in 2005, I got a grant from the Friends of the Library. So yay, thank you, Friends of Libraries.
So fun.
Yeah, shout out to Friends of the Libraries. They gave me a grant in 2005 to buy a bunch of graphic novels. And that was really when I first started working with them, and I had to do some research to back up my grant application. So that was like the first, and then in 2009, I actually taught a like a 1 credit class in the information school, in the iSchool, on graphic novels, because they were looking for people to just teach teach some courses. And so I volunteered to teach a graphic novel class, which was like way more than I was expecting. And so I actually had to learn a lot more really quickly to actually teach this class. And also I wrote an article in 2010 about graphic novels and being used in our reserve collection. So those are the kinds of things that I have done. And what was it like? It was interesting. I learned so much teaching the class because I had to research a lot. But then in doing the research for the article, it was a pretty short article, but in the article, what I did was I looked at all of our course reserves. So all the books that had been put on reserve for course, and just figured out what courses they were on for. And then I contacted some of the professors who had used them over and over again. And it was just really interesting, the data that came out of that. So this is back in 2010. And so, for example, like Mouse had been put on reserve 10 times back in 2010. I'm sure it's been on reserve many more times than that. But it was for 5 different areas. So it was like art and anthro and history and English and chid. Like they had all used Mouse. And it was, and then talking to the instructors about like, why did you use these graphic novels? And they said, they did have some pushback, but overall that the students really liked having graphic novels in their courses, and it helped them see them as like legitimate books. I mean, they're legitimate sources to use for history classes and all sorts of different classes. So that was really interesting, just figuring out. Since then, I've always sort of looked at our course reserves to see if graphic novels are being used, and they always are. Like every time I check, there's always one. So right now, I just looked and there was a graphic novel on for English 370 class. So they continue to be used quite heavily at the UW and in courses.
Okay, I have 2 follow-up questions for you.
Okay.
So I moved closer to the microphone to ask.
Maybe we should pass the mic.
Yeah. So when you started here in 2000, that when you were starting your library degree?
I actually graduated in 2001, so I was working as a grad student for a few years before I graduated in 2001, and then was hired permanently in 2001.
Now I don't remember what my second question was. Of course, I should have written it down. I got so distracted. But you started talking about, oh, I remember what it is. What made you so you noticed that there wasn't a lot of graphic novels here at UW, and then what made you think that that was something to explore more as a professional librarian?
For one, there was something that I enjoyed. Like I said, I've always been really attracted to the visual, but also I to be honest, I think it was a little bit of like, well, at some point I'm gonna have to write articles and publish and do um some professional development. And was like, this is a niche and this is an area that I could explore and I could actually do some work in because it hadn't really been done that much at UW. And at that point it was pretty it was we had bought some and there were some people using them, but it wasn't obviously when I looked at in 2010 they were already being used, but it was just an area that I thought could use more exploration.
Great, thanks. And then Allie, when was the first time you worked with?
Yeah, so I had done some very fun sort of like readers advisory stuff at various points in my career. So that would be like recommending graphic novels to people. And in particular, when I worked at a community college when I was adjuncting, that was a lot of fun. But actually this exhibit was the first time I really got to like dive into it on kind of like an intellectual level and do research specifically on graphic novels and not graphic novels as sort of part of a larger category like comics or pulp fiction or something like that. Yeah.
So have you faced opposition while collecting graphic novels or incorporating this into library collections here or in the past? And then how have you noticed like a change in the attitude towards it since you first started working with them? And could you tell us a little about that?
I'll just go first because mine's quick, which is no, I haven't really seen it. I think they're a lot more accepted now. So it's just not something I've personally run into.
I haven't actually run into it at the UW. Where I have seen it is more when I started doing some research back in in like 2005. Almost all the articles that I was finding were, comics aren't just for kids anymore, those kinds of justifying articles. And I found so many of them and I got really frustrated reading the same thing over and over again. Like, how many times do we have to justify this? And that's one of the reasons why I was looking at how many times graphic novels had been used in courses to kind of, again, justify it. I see a lot fewer of those sort of justifying or, arguing that graphic novels are academic enough. Although I just saw one recently that I was like, really? It's 2024. We still having to like justify this? And I didn't ever get any pushback here at the UW. What I will say though is what I found was that the cataloging was more work than I thought it would be. So I didn't get pushback, but what I got was like, this is an email from 2005 when we hadn't started really buying a lot of them. So this is the cataloger who's saying, so, for instance, if we have a Brazilian author who publishes a comic book series in Argentina, which is translated in English and published in the United States as a graphic novel, do we call it graphic novel Brazil, graphic novel Argentina, or graphic novel United States? Because in art books, we add the geographic, a country of origin. But if we put the country in the graphic novels heading, do you think of that as where the artist or the writer came from, or do you think of it as the place where the item was published? And if the author and the artist are different, do we choose one or both for the country of origin? And then it's like, well, what if the inker or the colorist is from a different country? Or do we need to put country of origin for those people who are part of the team? And of course, like I had recently started, I'm just buying them, and I'm like, I just wanted to buy a graphic novel. I don't know. And then they're like, well, what is the difference between a comic and a graphic novel? And like, how do you define these things? And again, I was just I am so over my head. I have like no idea. So luckily now, and I was looking it up, we actually have like an 8-page policy for cataloging graphic novels now. So they had to work all this stuff out back in 2005, but we now have a whole thing that defines what is the difference between a cartoon or a comic strip or a graphic novel. But so again, it wasn't pushback. It was more of like people going, we have no idea what to do with these things.
Yes.
And things I hadn't considered, like, do you include the inker or the letterer into the catalog record for these things?
Yeah. So for those of you in the audience who don't know much about how library like operations work, the catalogers are the group of people that make the books accessible through computer software. And then additionally, like in the past, through card catalogs. And so coming up with those categories so that people would kind of intuitively find them is really important for their work. So they tend to be the group that many other librarians kind of come up against when you start bringing in either like confusing material, physically or digitally, because they'll be like, we need to come up with some basic word containers to attach to this so that people can find it and we can find it again. So of course it's one of those things where you're like, oh man, I never even thought like the like what is the place of origination for this graphic novel if it's like an international collaborative piece? Like, I don't know. And then there are like a lot of different types, like media types. So and you probably do this with your research as well, where there are like monographs or like single work titles where just the one is the entity in and of itself. And then there are things that are like serially published, like magazines, and in some cases comics are also obviously serially published, and that's a whole different type of description that we do to make sure that those are findable for everyone who's coming to the University of Washington. So it surprises me, but at the same time, I'm not at all surprised that that's where it was like, wait a minute, where do we fit these? Yeah, so that's really interesting.
The other question that I had was whether, sorry, the other thing I had to decide is whether or not we put them all together as a graphic novel collection, or if they're through the library, like, so, you know, Mouse would go in history, or, you know, or or is it like an art book, and so it would go in,
Or is it a biography?
or is it a biography? Exactly.
What did you decide?
Originally, Mouse was in history. We just decided to put them throughout the collection so that people would, who are looking in the section about World War II history, Mouse. So we had that, and then a few years ago, we just figured out that people really wanted to be able to browse just graphic novels. So now at least Odegaard has a separate graphic novel collection. So they're housed in a different floor than the rest of the collection and just separate. So you could just browse graphic novels, but we didn't know how people would look for them. Like, I'm sad that we sort of lost that. Like, if they go to the history of World War II section, they're not going to find Mouse. But we had so many people who are like, I just want to look at your graphic novels and see what you have.
So that also, I think it'd be a good time to mention that the exhibit itself is centered around 4 primary graphic novels, the first of which is Mouse, which is the first graphic novel that really became super popular and widely believed to be like legitimate literature in the field. So Mouse, if you don't know, is about a Holocaust survivor. And so that's why, but it's like a true story. It's a story of an artist hearing the story of his father who lived through the Holocaust. And so in that way, it could be a memoir, it could be fiction, or not fiction, but like a novel, or it could be a history book, or, you know, so there's like a lot of different, again, ways of categorizing things, which are things that librarians care about a lot, and maybe the rest of us don't think about too much. Okay. Do you distinctly remember a time when graphic novels started being taken more seriously as a medium?
Okay, I have the mic. So not so much that I distinctly remember because I was very young when a lot of this happened. And like I was not reading Mouse in, you know, the 90s, I was reading like the Babysitter's Club. But I mean, I do think that there are some sort of like benchmark moments. So Mouse, as Kat mentioned, was kind of one of the big graphic novels that really sort of solidified the medium as literature. It's the first graphic novel to ever win a Pulitzer. It happened in, I looked this up earlier today, 1992. And so that was a very big step forward. But there had also been a lot of really incredible work kind of leading up to that. So Alan Moore, um, who did comics with, I think, DC. I don't know if he ever went over to Marvel, but so he played a really big part in it. So he's responsible for some very like foundational, like influential runs. So he did Batman the Killing Joke. He also did V for Vendetta. He did Watchmen. And he did a really influential run of Swamp Thing, and that all happened in like the 80s. And then in the late 80s, early 90s was also Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Um, and so these are all sort of things that I think really started pushing that boundary that had been put between sort of comics and literature, and kind of flirting with the edge a little bit. Yeah, so I think those were kind of some big moments.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I don't think that there was one moment. And to me, the thing that is signaling that they're being taken more seriously is like, one, that they're being used in courses, and two, that I am seeing fewer, if not none, but I'm seeing fewer of those articles about like graphic novels aren't just for kids anymore, kind of thing. But I think you're exactly right about the time. 2010, I think, when Watchmen came out as a movie, that was another sort of
Big resurgence.
of graphic novels. Yeah. So, I don't think it was one thing, but there were a lot of steps.
Part of the reason I wanted to ask is because I read a lot of graphic novels growing up in comics and things, and I would say that a lot of the time people would act like I wasn't reading when I was reading those things. And I still feel like to an extent people have that perception, but when I got into college, like my actual introduction, like the second course of literature classes we were like required to take, Watchmen was one of the primary course texts, and I was like, ha, I knew this wasn't just me looking at pretty pictures. So yeah,
Well,
I that's why I was kind of wondering about it.
yeah, and I also think that it has to do with sort of like the audience shifting, because originally it was very focused towards sort of children, or it was a little bit like Pulp Fiction, and by that I mean like the adventure magazines that were a little smutty. Like it was kind of, there was these two extremes. And I feel like kind of as they started creeping more towards the center, and that audience of just like a general but adult audience, or more adult audience, is when you also started seeing that shift. So it stopped being either like X-rated or G-rated, and we started getting into the
Like-
PG-13 medium.
Yeah. So in addition to graphic novels kind of appearing more in the library world and in academic settings and stuff, there have been big conversations recently that I've noticed about zines in library collections, and those have a pretty strong, so zines are, it's short for like magazine. They're kind of like non-officially published works, and they kind of grew in popularity during the 80s punk movement. Like especially in the United Kingdom, but all over the world. And um so when you started like in school, like at what age did you guys become aware of zines, and like how has that kind of factored into your approach to graphic novels and kind of illustrated literature? Because quite a few zines are, some of them are like just text and stuff, but a lot of them also have like some kind of illustrative component to them.
Yeah, I didn't become aware of zines until, I don't know, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. Maybe 10. No, maybe 15 is too many. But I think zines are really interesting. I feel like there was sort of a big upswing of them. I saw a lot of them being used for classes, people doing zines classes, and then they sort of not disappeared, but like sort of went out of fashion. Now I'm seeing sort of like an upswing and them being used as actual projects in classes again. And I, I I think the thing that I keep thinking of with zines, though, as much as I want them, like it was so hard to figure out how to catalog and collect and put graphic novels in the catalog so that people could find them, that I am just like, oh Lord, like how are we possibly gonna put in like zines where there's not even maybe an author, or maybe, or they're not actually even published. There's no ISBN, there's no, like, you don't know who made it or where, or all these questions. So I think it's a good, and I'm glad we're thinking about it and maybe starting to buy some, but yeah, they are going to be notoriously
They are.
difficult to catalog and store and preserve.
Anne knows I have many opinions, strong opinions about how one should collect and store zines that I will spare all of you because that is not the question that I'm being asked, but I have thoughts. So I've worked with zines and stuff for quite a while. I feel like there was kind of a lull in popularity for kind of like it was like the punk scene, but also not just in like the like 80s, but also like into the 90s. So like Riot Girl, grunge even, and like all of that, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, actually had a very big, we were like, they were into zines. Zines were a thing. And then I feel like kind of in the late 90s, early to like mid 2000s, it kind of just like tapered down a little bit. There wasn't a lot of popularity. And I feel like it was about maybe like 10 years ago that they really started seeing that kind of like resurgence. Um, so I think that that's part of why there kind of wasn't any, and then there was a lot of interest. Um, so I've taught a couple of classes, like given some lectures on kind of like the history of zines, which like arguably goes back further than you think. I've seen a lot of things that actually suggest that Thomas Paine's Common Sense was the first zine printed in the US. But there's also like the fanzine movement, which was in the 60s, which I think one of the first ones was called Spockanalia, which is one of the best names in the world. Um, and then I've also made zines for things. So I work with a group called the uh, Abolitionist Library Association. We put out a zine on some things that we were working on. I also put out a zine with some colleagues about sort of labor organizing, specifically in archives. And so they're just really great things. What I really love about zines and why I think that they're really good for all kinds of different classes and projects is because they're very, very accessible. Like, yes, you can make these beautiful art pieces, and I've seen some truly beautiful, like, artistic zines, but also like they don't have to be. They can be very simple. Like one of my very favorite zines is just like a list of cute date ideas that are free. And that's it. That's the zine. And I think that that's really lovely. And then I've also seen ones where it's just like this incredibly detailed, gorgeous artwork. So you don't have to be sort of like really artistic or a really like highbrow writer in order to make just like a really good zine that's really wonderful and fun.
All right, the next question is for you again, Allie. So in 2019, and this is related to zines, you curated an exhibit called Lowbrow High Culture. It's also the longest running exhibit in special collections history, I think, because the pandemic shut it down. So it was, anyway, that was the reason. We also had a mezzanine, I think, exhibit that was up for about a year. That's true. For the same reason. So can you tell us a little bit about that exhibit? I think of it as sort of like the part one to the exhibit that we have currently on now. Medium is the message. And then about kind of the reception whilst the humanity was still crawling the earth.
Yeah, before we all went inside, became indoor kids. Yeah, it is technically the longest running one. I think it ran for close to a year, but it was literally because about a week before it was supposed to close. COVID hit, so I couldn't take it down before we left campus. Um, lowbrow high culture. So for those who don't know, the lowbrow art movement is kind of this art movement that is centered around sort of like comics. It actually has its sort of original start in hot rod culture. And it kind of started there, and that's called the lowbrow art movement, and then sort of transitioned into these other art forms like pulp fiction and comics. And you see a lot of very similar art styles in things like band, like music art, album art, other stuff. So that was kind of what the exhibit was tracing sort of that visual language through these different uses. So we had a lot of really fun stuff. So we had some different kinds of zines and stuff that had been put out by different sort of groups in the Pacific Northwest that are in the special collections holdings. But we also had book arts pieces. We had flyers. That was my favorite, was we actually went through a lot of flyers in a couple different collections that were mostly student flyers. And I literally just Xeroxed them and I made a case that just looks like a bulletin board with all these different flyers. And so that was really, really fun to kind of see, like I said, just that consistent sort of visual language and the like sort of inspiration that so many things took from it. So that was kind of the main idea of it. So comics and sort of zines played a part in it, or graphic novels in a much smaller way, because it was like one part of this larger sort of discussion. So that was kind of how they're like a little related. They're like cousins.
And then is there anything you both would like to share about working on the most recent exhibit?
Trying to think, like, I think I'll say, working in Odegaard, that we have done a lot of exhibits doing graphic novels because they lend themselves so well because they are so visual and the covers are colorful and they do grab people. People, want to pick them up and look at them. So it was a lot of fun to do one in a different place because in Odegaard we just like put up a bunch of graphic novels for people to read. I think one of the interesting things about working on this particular display that we can't really do in Odegaard because we just put up things is that they tend to often be about heavier subjects like trauma, to be blunt about it. And I think there's a reason for that, and that is that trauma is hard to express in words, and the pictures and the graphicness of graphic novels really tend to express that pain of trauma way better than just text could do. And so there's a lot of things in that exhibit, and I know we even talked about it when we were it's not an exhibit about trauma, but it's about really heavy thing. I mean, Persepolis is about a revolution that at times was quite violent, and Mouse is about the Holocaust, and the one I chose, Epileptic, it's about disease and it's autobiographical about his brother's disease, and his disease is often represented as a monster or beast, or and his brother, how his it's like a dragon or other things. And it's so interesting to me how those kinds of things that can be represented like that are so much more effective. That I find that Epileptic is just, it's so interesting to see that, and it really gets across what happened to that family and how the disease affected everyone in that family.
Yeah, we had a conversation about this. I don't remember when exactly, but I worked on the ones that I worked on. I worked on the cases related to Mouse. And so one of the things I was talking about is how in that case, because everyone, for those who are not familiar with it, if you're not familiar with it, everyone is drawn as animals. So the Jews are mice, the cats are Nazis, Americans are bulldogs, a
Dogs.
dog of
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind. They're all different animals. And so one of the things that I would talk about with that is sort of how that sort of degree of separation by drawing the characters as animals instead of as people kind of allowed more of almost that violence to come through, because it was like we could understand and process it better with that distance. And kind of related to that, one of the things that I had, fun seems like the wrong word, but that I sort of like enjoyed a little bit, was sort of finding ties to the original the subject matter of the foundational texts. So it was epileptic, mouse, Persepolis, and then Kat worked on one called Incognito. And so we found other pieces of material that were related to these. So for example, for Mouse, Kat was able to find and brought out these really beautiful book arts pieces. Two of them had like different Jewish proverbs on them. And then there was a really beautiful book arts piece about Auschwitz that was incredibly moving. And so kind of being able to sort of tie into other areas of the collection. And in particular, these were book arts pieces, but we also have some like historical items as well that were just really, I think, really interesting and really fun. Not fun. Fun is the wrong word. I don't know what to say about it.
Interesting.
Interesting, I guess, is the right.
Okay, so to wrap up the like organized questions, and is there a new graphic novel in Odegaard that you want to shout out, or an old favorite you'd want to recommend to people?
One that I really recommend is Information Now, which is just, it's literally like how to search databases in graphic novel. So, talks about graphic novels in cataloging. And it's the most librarian thing in the world. And I have read it several times, and and I think it really does sort of help you understand searching and like how Boolean operators and that kind of thing work in a graphic format. I highly recommend Information Now, a graphic guide to student research. I think all students should read this. A couple of favorites. One graphic novel artist that I think is underrated is Jason. Although I object to his going by just one name, because that is a cataloging nightmare to have just Jason as the artist. So exactly, especially when he's got like a one-word title and he's got a one-word name. But
Inconsiderate.
he is very inconsiderate to catalogers. However, I will forgive him just because his artwork is so great. I love Jason's artwork. This one called which is also a very librarian book. It has no words at all. The whole story is just told through images. So I really enjoy Jason. And just a new one that has getting a lot of press, Ducks 2 Years in the Oil Sands by Kate Beaton is a good one that's just come out recently that I recommend as well.
Thanks for those. And then Allie, is there like a particular zine or collection kind of related and special collections that you recommend people check out?
Yeah, so currently in the exhibit, neither Anne nor Kat will be surprised by my answer, because this is my favorite thing ever, which is we have the first volume, a run of the first volume of Raw Magazine. So Raw Magazine was a comics with an X. They're very attached to the X at the end of comics magazine that was actually put out by Art Spiegelman, who's the author of Mouse, and more by his wife, Françoise Moulet. And she kind of like, I think the implication I got is she kind of like bullied Art into it, which I respect a lot. Because she was like, no, I don't want to do this alone, and you're doing it with me, the end. And I feel like any spouse who has been voluntold about something can relate to that very well. But the reason why it's so cool is it was a very huge, influential sort of magazine, despite the fact that there's not actually that many issues. But one of the things that's really amazing about it is actually where Mouse was initially published. So very few people know this, but Mouse was not originally published in like the graphic novel form, or even in like there's 2 volumes of it. It was actually serialized first in Raw magazine. And so we actually have some of these issues, and they're currently on display in the exhibit. So you should go check them out because I love them. And then one of my other favorite collections is the Vietnam War ephemera collection, or Vietnam War era ephemera collection. So it's just sort of different like flyers and other things that are really cool. And the last thing I'll mention is we have this thing called amphitazine, which is something that I teach with a lot when I teach about graphic novels, because it's or about comics and zines in particular, because it's a really interesting example of sort of like a zine that's like for the community by the community, because it is a zine that is specifically geared towards drug users, and in particular gay male drug users. And it seems sort of like you're like, wait, what is this? Like, why would this thing need a magazine? But actually what they do is they would have these articles, in there about sort of the quote unquote culture, but next to them would be things about like, here are the numbers for rehabs when you're ready to get clean. Here are some needle exchanges so that you can at least do this safely, and like stuff like that. And it was actually something that was put out by the City of Seattle Health Department in collaboration with several LGBT organizations. So it's something that sort of on its surface seems very like taboo, but once you actually look into it, is actually a really incredible example of sort of what zines can be used for. So those are my 3 favorites at the end.
Love it. All right, so we're gonna turn it over to the audience. I'm gonna have to exit out of this. Like to have it like this so I can see what's going on.
Okay.
Does anyone in the room have a question?
All 2 of you?
Oh, yeah.
No? Oh, awesome.
Yeah, you should come to the exhibit because we have just like a selection of them flip through that you can just sit down and read.
Mhm.
You don't have to, go quickly or anything. We've got seats and stuff, so you can just sit and hang out if you want.
Please come see us. We're very lonely down in the basement.
Yeah. Or you can come to Odegaard.
Or you
We
can
have
go
a very large collection on the 2nd floor behind the information desk.
Yeah.
It is rows and rows. We are not lonely, but you can still come see us, even though we don't even have any empty seats. There's
There's a lot of things.
there's a lot of people in Odegaard, but you can come too and browse the graphic collection.
Do we have any other questions from our virtual audience here? Also, I do hope that the audio was sort of resolved after I got closer. Sorry about that. All right. Well, I'm not really seeing anything come in, so in that case, I think I'll go ahead and stop the meeting. I will clean up the recording, and we'll post it to somewhere. I was like, to our YouTube channel that doesn't really exist, but maybe we'll make one. And yeah. So thank you guys for being here. This was really fun for me. I hope that everything worked out on your virtual end. We now know we need a virtual person to be monitoring that for the future. This is our first hybrid event. So thank you guys for bearing with us through some of the technical issues and such. So have a great, Jasper. What are your thoughts on manga specifically, if you have any? Jasper, manga is basically all I personally read. And we didn't put it really into the exhibit at all.
No, well, we don't have a ton of it in special collections because a lot of that is, I think, over in the East Asia Library.
Yeah.
If it's in the collection. So it's sort of out of the scope of our collection, which is I think the main reason why, like in terms of like what are my thoughts on it specifically, it's great. That's my thought on it.
And do you have thoughts about manga?
Do you have thoughts about manga specifically?
I have several thoughts on manga. One, yeah, we don't have a lot of it outside of outside of the East Asia Library. But if you're interested in manga, go to the East Asia Library. They have a fairly large collection. In fact, a lot of their collection comes from somebody who bought a storage unit, you know, one of those like they buy one. Yeah, and they don't know what's in it. They just buy like for $100, I'm just gonna sight unseen. And then the storage locker was like filled with manga, and the president was like, I don't know what to do with this. So they gave it to East Asia, and it was a huge donation of manga. Thank you, whoever abandoned their storage unit. Although I feel bad for whoever that was. Somebody had a very large manga collection. We have some of it in Odegaard, not a ton. I mean, in translation, not in Japanese or Korean, in English. There are interesting things about manga. One, since it's so serial, that's another problem with buying. Graphic novels are what we call graphic novels are usually just one, but manga is something that's serial. It's so much harder to buy because I have to remember to buy the next issue. We don't just get automatically sent a lot of these things when I'm collecting. Like we get some stuff sent just automatically on approval, but I have to remember, somebody has to tell me like, oh, volume 12 came out. Why don't you have volume 12? Oh, because nobody let me know. So then I have to buy volume 12. So it's hard. And then what if you lose, somebody spills coffee on volume 6 and then you can't go back and buy volume 6, so then you've got it incomplete. It makes it pretty tricky to buy manga. I do really think there are a lot of people here who really like it, and I enjoy the content. It does make it harder. There's also the visual language of it is a little bit different. I mean, it's not only like reading, the opposite direction from the, like what we would call the back of the book to the front of the book, but there's so much of visual language in comics where, like a moth flying out of a wallet, like we know that means that person has no money, that they are totally broke. But there's so many things that we learn as a Western culture that is what that symbolizes, and there's so many of those sort of symbols that are different. You have to learn this whole new sort of language or of manga reading that. Not that you shouldn't, I think you should in it, but it's often for Western readers, it's harder because we don't have that like visual language already.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I sort of forced my partner to watch some anime with me recently, and what I've learned is that there's actually like starter animes you should begin with, because we have to like pause it and I'll be like, okay, this means, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't obvious. Like there was a point in my childhood in which I was like looking these things up to understand like what mushrooms growing out of somebody means, like that kind of thing. Which, so okay, let's see if there's another question. Yes, Molly, we will be getting the recording up. Yeah, and it is really, Cheryl mentions that graphic novels are really popular in the rest of the world, and I find it fascinating how it compares to the US. I think one of the things that is pretty interesting about manga specifically is that in like and Korean manga, which I think is called manhwa, it's so much more common to have like a prolific adult audience, whereas here it's still a little bit niche. So and in other parts of the world as well, but of course those kind of come to mind the most for me because that's what I read. Alice, I'd love to do a manga meetup group. That sounds weird. Like, I'm like the only person in my life that's as obsessed as me. And yes, you can definitely donate manga. And kind of as Anne and Allie suggested, going to the East Asia Library, also called Teal, would be the place to start because they have the biggest collection. Oh yeah, and this I don't even want to try to pronounce the French version of mangas, but we do actually have a couple of student-made French comics on display in the big case in front of special collection. So one of the French faculty here, Irina, actually does a project where they make little comics, and we have a couple of them on display. So if you want to check those out too, they're in French. But I was able to figure out what they said, and I don't speak French, so I think it's okay.
The visual language.
Visual language, everyone. All right, well, since I did kind of give a psych stop, I'm gonna go ahead and stop now for real this time. And too bad you guys aren't here in person because we have cookies. So the two of you who are here, please make sure you take some before you leave. All right, thanks everyone for joining. I'll post in the WAN and on our various social platforms about where you can find the recording later. And hopefully we'll see you at our next virtual event, which is in July. Book artist Tamar Stone is going to be doing a talk. It'll be really interesting. And if you come in person, her artwork will actually be on display. So, all right. Bye, folks.